Hi, everybody. I'm so glad that you're here today and joining me and my guest, Dan Adams, whom I will introduce to you in just a moment. September is National Suicide Prevention Month in the United States, and this week, September 6th to 12th, is actually National Suicide Prevention Week, and it encompasses September 10th, which is World Suicide Prevention Day. And this is a campaign both in the United States and around the world to inform and engage people about suicide prevention, make sure that people know the warning signs, make sure that they are talking about it, and it's a time to just really focus in on this major concern of hurting people all around us. Of course, this is very, very personal to me and my family. Most of you know that my 27-year-old son, Matthew, took his life 7.5 years ago after living with serious mental illness for most of his life. And in the years since, I have talked to hundreds and hundreds of people who have either lost someone to suicide or they themselves are someone who lives with suicidal thoughts, and maybe they've attempted. And there's really just so much pain out there. One of the most vulnerable groups I've come to learn is young adults ages 15 to 24, and suicide is the #2 killer of young people in this age group. And there's some evidence, growing body of evidence, that the stress of COVID-19 is actually increasing the mental health struggles of people in that age group. There is an increase, I've heard of increases in both calls to the hotlines, visits to emergency rooms with attempts. Just heard this week of our local children's hospital that serves children up to age 17 or 18 is an increase. And sometimes the summer months, there's a decrease, at least around here. But this summer, it's not true. If they are flooding into that hospital with very serious attempts, and it's really a brutal time. And many of us who have lost someone to suicide have such an intense connection with this topic, and many of us have launched our own personal crusades, if you will, to make sure that people are talking about suicide, they're talking about prevention, making sure that it's a common topic of conversation, that it's not taboo, that it's not off limits, that we can really, really engage with people on it. But unfortunately, talking just about statistics or using explicit language or telling graphic stories really hasn't proven to be particularly effective in reducing the number of suicides. That number in the United States is actually increasing every year. So far from making a dent or even stabilizing that number keeps going up. So some of what we're doing in prevention isn't that effective. So I've been on a search for ways to actually prevent suicide, prevent suicide attempts, maybe reduce the amount of suicidal ideation that people are experiencing, and hadn't been particularly satisfied with it because, like I said, the numbers just keep going up. But a couple years ago, I was introduced to a program called Sources of Strength that I love. It's one of the few evidence-based prevention programs that's used in schools. It's been proven to reduce the risk of suicide with some of the students who participate in the program, and to increase the protective factors that help students stay stabilized and maybe not even have those thoughts as often, or that they won't act on them. And I love Sources of Strength approach, and that's why I've invited Dan Adams to be with us today. Dan is the Director of Training for Sources of Strength. It's a strength-based upstream, and he'll explain that to you, suicide prevention program. He has a master's degree in religious studies from the University of Cape Town in South Africa. He's a member of the Faith Communities Task Force of the National Action Alliance for Suicide Prevention, and he's a board member of the Suicide Prevention Coalition of Colorado. Dan lives in Denver, Colorado, a very lucky man, with his wife, Tanya, and his children, Tanya, and his children, Jack and Lexi. So Dan, welcome. We are so glad that you're with us today. And I always think of you as wearing a hat, and you've met my expectations today. You've got your hat. And I want you to just start off by telling us, a little bit about yourself, about sources of strength, and what makes it different from other suicide prevention efforts.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Kay, and for that lovely introduction, but also setting the stage of this moment that we're in, which is really challenging. And Source of Strength is passionate about, in moments of crisis or adversity, that the human capacity for resilience, of overcoming that adversity and pushing back with strengths and assets that we already have in our life, to be able to find ways to cope. And find our way around adversity or through adversity so that we can overcome, whether it's related to suicide, as we're talking about this month with National Suicide Prevention Month and that initiative, or whether it's with other major crises that we're experiencing socially in our lives. This pandemic has exposed many of the fault lines of the services that are available and the way that we connect as a culture and a society, from increases in substance use disorders, increases in violence or abuse, but also an increase in conversations about coping and how we get through those things. So, at Source of Strength, as you mentioned, one of our passions is to share stories of hope, help, and strength, and to try and avoid, widespread public messaging of sad, shock, and trauma. We live in an age of sickness right now. We know that things spread through networks, things like illness or a virus. We know that other, social factors like suicidality have the capacity to spread through networks. Those behaviors and beliefs and norms and how we deal with adversity can spread through network. But the amazing thing is that hope and help seeking and strengths can also ripple through networks. Things like generosity and altruism, things like help seeking from trusted adults, and believing that adults can be helpful for young people when they're experiencing a crisis. These things can ripple through social networks and create waves of strength. And so one of the things we're really passionate about is empowering students and staff and communities and faith-based communities across this country and in a few other countries to really tell those stories. Because when we turn on the news and read what's going on in our lives right now, we're bombarded by risk data and death data and all the crises that we're facing. But in the midst of all those moments, there are also really powerful stories of connection and of resilience and of overcoming. And so our program really is designed to work with schools primarily, but also wider, to tell those stories, because they are really powerful prevention and they're good medicine to tell stories of strength. And you mentioned that kind of upstream approach that we take to prevention. And a lot of people in the field have probably heard of it before, of upstream prevention. But if there's a story that goes along with that of a river that runs through a valley and then over a waterfall. Right near that waterfall's edge is a village. And there's the woman who takes a daily walk along the river's edge. And one day as she's walking, she hears a person caught up in the stream about to go over the waterfall. And so she dives into action, takes action, swims out in the river, grabs this person, brings them back to shore, performs CPR. It's a heroic event that the whole village celebrates. But day after day, there are more and more young people, young or old, in that river about to go over the waterfall. So they mobilize as any community would and build watchtowers and train lifeguards and have people at the river's edge 24/7. And they're able to save a lot of people from that crisis moment, right? But they're not able to save everyone. There's some that are difficult to see, or they come under the surface of the water, or they come at night and they can't be identified. And so burdened by this reality, the woman starts to walk upstream, and everybody has a little freak out panic moment where they say, "Where are you going? We need all hands on deck. You started this work." And she says, "I'm going to go upstream to see if I can't prevent some people from falling in the river in the first place. Or can we put up some signs that say, hey, watch out, river ahead, don't fall in? Or can we identify what is causing people to fall in the river so commonly? Or can we also train young and old human beings to identify when they're in that river of crisis and how to swim to shore and get out?" And so that's what Sources is really passionate about. Our primary mission is to do upstream prevention, to build protective factors like trust towards adults and emotional regulation and coping strategies and early help seeking, that it's a sign of bravery and courage to ask for help, not a sign of weakness, that we all need to do it and be interdependent on each other. If we do those things really well, we'll see less crisis at that waterfall moment downstream. That's really our passion. That's what the science is bearing out to be true. We also try to have an impact at that intervention moment, because as you shared personally from your life, there are a lot of people that have sat along that waterfall's edge with their loved ones, with their community, holding on for dear life, trying to save lives, and who have also lost folks. And so we really believe that empowering young people and empowering your staff and empowering your peers to be connectors to help and agents of change in that space as well, that we can change the culture of what it means to connect a friend to help when you know they're struggling. Because we know there are really prevalent codes of secrecy and silence that exist that prevent people from asking for help. So we'll talk a little bit more, I'm sure, about that. How do we ask for help? But that's really critical, intervening and connecting to help when someone is in crisis. And then we're also really passionate about after a loss or a death, which we really all at this moment are in. Lots of grieving moments, whether it's the loss of school as we know it, or the loss of the ability to work, or the loss of loved ones, whether suicide related or otherwise, or COVID related. We know it's important to have space to talk about grief, but also the strengths in that moment that are getting you through it. How have you bounced back? How have you recovered from adversity? What are you using right now to say, even though people are struggling, people are getting through it the best they can, and there's a lot of really beautiful, magical moments of resilience happening with that. You know, all of that, long story short, boils down to the
Hey,
core.
I got to stop you. Wait, I just have to stop you. We talked about this ahead of time. That I might interject myself.
That's all right.
Dan, I will, there are moments in your life that that you really remember, and you can remember because they're either really happy or they're really sad, or there was just something momentous, or whatever. There's just these moments that we remember. I think I will always remember the moment I first heard you share that waterfall story. I don't know why. I'd never heard it before. I'd been in, trying to help with people, suicide prevention. I think I first met you 2 years ago. So 5 years I had already been doing what I could as a non-professional in this space. But when you shared that about the waterfall, and all my efforts up to that point had been sitting at the waterfall, the years that I spent trying to keep my son from going over the waterfall, the years that I worked with other people, the standing alongside families who were trying to pull their loved ones out of the water repeatedly. And when you shared that visual of upstream, it makes me emotional every single time, because I had that epiphany of, this is right. This is not just, oh, this makes a good story. No, this is right. This is good. We've got to have people at the waterfall always, because there will always be people who slip through and they're going to go over. Always, 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 always need great services and help at the edge of the waterfall. And we need them for afterwards. But why aren't we putting more effort, more time, more intentionality, more research, more creativity, more passion upstream? Why aren't we addressing the factors that are leading people to jump into that stupid river in the first place? And so the epiphany that I had when I first heard you express that was, that's what I want to do. That's what I want to be about. That's where I want to put my energies in suicide prevention. Yes, I will always care about the crisis moments, always, always. But if there's a way to keep more people from getting in that river and heading over those falls, good grief, we have to do that. And so without even knowing much from there, it was like, okay, I believe in this. I am on board with this. This is really good. So, and I don't get tired of hearing it. I don't get tired of hearing that story. I've heard it many times since then, not from you and other people, and I never get tired of it, because it just feels so logical, so irrefutable, that there must be more effort put right there. So carry on, but just thank you. I had
Yeah,
to
no,
just
I
say
think
how much that means to me, how much I believe in this.
it's really powerful, especially given your lived experience and having lost a family member. You know, you're the one who also introduced me to thinking about all the folks who have spent many, many years by that water's edge, in pain and also in hope for their loved ones. And that is so critical, as you say. We need more and better and more well-distributed mental health services and diagnostic tools and psychiatric facilities that can help people when they're in crisis. We need more services of people to respond when there is loss and grief. But as you say, one of the critical elements that's just been overlooked is what's happening before the crisis that is leading people. And sometimes it's not just they're jumping in, but they're being
Right.
pushed.
Right.
There are
Yes.
forms of depression. There
Yeah.
are mental health disparities, which is just a clean way of saying that white supremacy has privileged certain bodies over others in
Yes.
terms of who gets the help they need.
Yes.
But also, we really believe we can't prevent the mass amount of deaths that are happening due to suicide and other related issues by talking about death all the time.
Right.
It might be important to use those statistics and numbers if we're trying to convince policymakers or administrators or town officials that suicide is a problem that we have and that we need to address it constructively and strategically. But we got to be able to talk about life. What leads to life? And so there's a Gunderson and Cochrane are two public health scholars and theologians that have written a book, and they coined this phrase, the leading causes of life. That so much in public health and in prevention, we talk about the leading causes of death, but we don't talk about the leading causes of life enough. What leads to life? Where is it breaking forth? How do we encourage it? How do we celebrate it? How do we bolster things that have the consequence of people experiencing life as a way of pushing back against, you know, early death for folks who their death came too soon for them, or they were unable to win the fight they had been fighting for most of their life, in terms of mental health. And so that's one of the things we're really passionate about. You know, we do that really simply through this wheel of strength that you've seen before. This is the core of everything we do. Mark Lomery, our founder and director, when he was creating Sources of Strength, was working with a lot of indigenous communities, native communities in North Dakota, was inspired by the medicine wheel and holistic well-being, that we can't just do suicide prevention that only focuses on mental health, especially in rural areas with, you know, massive, opportunity deserts and access to mental health resources. That can't be the only piece. It's an important one. We need better services and continue to support and resource our current providers. But health and well-being is so dependent on so many other factors in our life, like family support, whether that's your immediate, you're born into family, the family you've created, or the family that you choose or that chooses you, right? Some people experience family rejection that can be really damaging, but they can also experience family acceptance again or through reconnection with chosen family, positive friendships in our lives, that people are authentic and show up and care for us, and who really are there for us in tough times. Mentors. We know that having a trusted adult is really the number one protective factor, or one of the most protective factors for young people. And particularly for specific groups that are at higher risk. For LGBTQ plus youth, having one accepting adult reduces the chances of suicide attempt by 40%, just having one adult who cares. We know healthy activities and acts of generosity build the spirit and give us resilience. It's like getting into the hope gym or the resilience gym, that we build muscles and resistance to adversity. You know, Pamela Indahorn, who you may know from Indian Health Services and sits on the National Task Force, said the other day in a meeting that when working with Native youth, really to say resilience is an act of resistance, not only to adversity, but to forms of oppression, to the attempts to annihilate an entire people group. That being resilient is a form of resistance and is an active process. It's not a passive one. And so generosity, spirituality in all its form, places, people, practices, and then the more institutional ones of physical health and mental health, the two sides of the same coins. Our bodies on our brains and how they relate. And so this is at the core of everything we do, and we're really passionate about sharing that story and giving that tool to students, to staff, to communities to tell their story. That Source's model is not that we come in and share all our expert insights, but hopefully create a space for people to tell their stories. And the more you tell your story of strength, the more it becomes internalized, that it becomes a part of who you are, not that, I'm an at-risk youth, which is a misnomer, right? And pins young people to be just the sum total of the risky environment they've grown up in, but that they're high opportunity, high potential youth, that they've experienced adversity and they are strong and they know that about themselves. And they also have a language to describe what are the strengths that have helped. And so we love to start from that place of what are the assets you already have? What's working for you? If it's in terms of anger management, that moment you actually stopped being violent and angry and got control, to start from there. What did you do right there? How did you get yourself under control? Let's work backwards from that. And to say, how do we use those skills earlier and more often? When it comes to mental health crisis, people have lots of ways of coping with adversity. How do we capitalize on those and spread them across the community? Yeah.
Oh no, I love it. I've been trying to do what I could to get sources of strength in Orange County, where I live.
Yeah.
In some of the high schools, have not been successful so far, but I haven't given up on that.
We do. I don't know. I forgot to call you, but with the pediatric psychiatry unit at the hospital, we're working on a contract with them right now to bring sources in. I think the CARES Act had funded them with some money that.
Oh, that makes me so happy. That makes me so happy. That is great. But so until then, just in the last year, there were a couple of high school groups, two different high schools where I live had asked if I would come and talk to, they have like a Christian club or whatever, and they wanted me to talk about mental health and suicide. And I had like all of, I don't know, 13 minutes or something during their lunch break. And so I brought the wheel. I said, listen, there's this amazing program that I hope comes to your school eventually, but until then, I want to show you this wheel. And so I did just this little pitch about, and just had them quickly just say, okay, so following some of the things that I've seen you guys do, name two of these maybe that you already feel like I've got some strength here. This is a resource in my back pocket based on the 8. And then maybe identify a couple of places where you think maybe I need to shore up those two. Maybe I don't feel as strong right there in that one. And they were captivated just in those 13 minutes with talking about identifying strengths that they already had in their life. So I've seen it just in tiny little microcosm place of it being effective in increasing even the conversation they had, looking at themselves through the, not all my deficits, not all of what is wrong in my life, but here's another way. Here are also the things that are going well or that are going okay, and I can hold on to these and use these in rough times. And then also I said, just remind each other. You're talking to your friend and your friend is feeling, hey, remember that old lady who brought that colored wheel thing to school the other day? And remember how we identified that you had, and so I've just seen it in that tiny little way of being.
I think what you speak to is, one, the simplicity of it, that it helps bring out what's already there in life. 2, that it acts like a mirror. That very often as adults, we can feel the urge to tell young people what the strengths we see in them, of like, no, you're really good at this or you're good at that. But their self-understanding might start from a place of, I got none of this. I got nothing. My life has been tough. My family is broken. My friends have betrayed me. Nobody loves me. And to do work with this wheel of strength can often be a mirror to reflect back, actually, given the chance to tell the stories and to dig deep into my lived experience, I can see these moments of resilience and strength that then become self-actualizing and build efficacy to say, I am strong in the midst of all the tough stuff, the risky environments I've grown up in. I have strength. And to have that come from the voice of the individual rather than placed on them by a teacher or a parent is really powerful. So we try to create those spaces for that kind of self-actualization.
I love it. I love the way you reframed an at-risk kid to a high potential
Yeah, that's one of my colleagues, just to give proper sourcing, Matt Hoffmeister, who's a social worker, used to work for St. Valley School District here in Colorado, now works for our team. He reframed that for us, that so often we use this language of at-risk youth that just pigeonholes them to be the sum total of their risky environment. And we know that those kids are often the most resilient. And it's not to fetishize the resilience
Right,
of people who have been oppressed, right? We need
right,
to change those systems,
right,
not just glorify the resilience, but
right,
also we need to start from a place of look at the creativity, the innovation, and the dynamic nature of coping that comes from folks who've grown up in tough situations. And the risky environment doesn't doom people to
right.
negative outcomes. There are things that we know mitigate risk and help boost protective factors to lead to thriving for everyone. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. I love it. I'm telling you, I love it so much. It is just, it is so positive. And as somebody who, my natural temperament, you know, in the Winnie the Pooh school of personality, I'm Eeyore. Um, I have always been Eeyore. I will probably die in Eeyore.
Mhm.
But my natural bent is to seeing what's wrong, to see what needs to change, to
Yeah.
see what's deficient, to see what's
Mhm.
lacking. And you know, it also gets all mixed in with the Enneagram. You know, I'm a 1 on the Enneagram. So
You want to reform it. You want to change it.
yes, I can
Yeah.
always spot what's wrong.
Mhm.
So this is so good for me because it counters maybe my natural approach to something, and just, but in such a way that doesn't feel Pollyanna to me. It doesn't feel like, hey, let's just smack on a happy face on top of
Yeah.
all of this and keep going. It actually feels real. And I think that's what I respect about it.
Yeah, yeah, I think you say something important there, that there is a danger in just toxic positivity of everything's going to be all right. That doesn't match up to a lot of people's reality, especially currently,
Yeah.
that everything's just going to be all right. But there is a way we can train our brains to start to scan even the toughest of environments for the good stuff in the midst of it. And how are we, drawing on that to become incredibly resilient in the face of what, which I think is one of the opportunities right now, is that it is a conversation about coping is
Yeah.
universal right now, not
Yeah.
only in our nation, in
Right.
the world. People are talking about how are they coping with what's
Right.
going on, because it's not ending anytime soon.
No.
On an ongoing basis, how are we coping? And we've
Right.
heard from some folks anecdotally that people have been wrestling with long-term mental health diagnoses are feeling validated by that other people are now struggling, and they're talking about and being vulnerable about what's helping them and getting
Yeah.
therapy and the ways that they're coping. And that tells a story that says to other folks who have been struggling with mental health concerns or crises for a long time, and living with those, that there's hope, and that
Yeah,
other people are
that's
living.
really good. And I think you're right. I hadn't thought of it, but just the way you said that, I do believe the conversation has shifted from our maybe normal "Hi, how are you?" to "Hi, how are you coping?" You
Mhm,
know, it's like we just even bypass the "How are you?" We almost assume now
mhm.
that everybody's struggling.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
just
And
assuming
how are you
everybody's
is such
struggling.
an intense
It's
question.
not just how, but it's like, what are you doing to get through? How are you coping? How are you handling this? And
Mhm.
that is a switch. That is really a change. That's a
Yeah.
switch. And I can see how that would be, as you say, very validating for people who live with, you know, a more chronic state of not feeling great all
Mhm.
the time. I
Yeah.
want to ask you a couple of questions specific kind of to COVID-19, and then I want you to, Sources of Strength has developed this incredible little 30-page or 29 or 30-page something called Resources for Practicing Strength at Home that I think is so intensely practical. But I want to just ask you a couple of questions first about just even so physical separation is being encouraged. We're all being encouraged, you know, to stay a little bit separate, a little bit away, the mask, all that for our physical health. But like we just said, we know that that kind of separation is not good for our mental health, especially over a long period of time. So what are some things that, not even necessarily just related to students, but just anybody watching this, what are some things that some of us can do, drawing on what we know of sources of strength principles to cope with the physical separation and caring for mental health?
Mm. Yeah, I know, as you say, we know the COVID pandemic, there's a modern civil rights movement happening, and there's an economic recession or depression that's happening. These all negatively affect people's mental health and have created new kinds of barriers. There were already barriers that existed for people accessing help when needing, but it has increased those divides and barriers in some ways around mental illness and substance use disorders in particular. And it's shone a spotlight on some of the fault lines and inequalities in America, that school closures and social isolation have affected just all students, but particularly students of color, Black, Indigenous, and students of color, and those living in poverty, right, have added damage to the way that we learn and to our mental health crises in the United States. But there are some signs also of hope in the midst of that, right, of connection. And I love that you use the phrase physical distancing rather than social distancing, right? That even though we're being asked to be physically distant from each other, we can still really be socially connected in lots of different ways. And it's highlighting the need, right? If you pull that out, we see the absence and we appreciate physical connection so much more than we ever have before. But it also is giving people to be really creative about social connection. And ways that they can do distancing measures while still trying to reduce that isolation. And so, we are hardwired for connection as human beings. Our bodies and our brains, we crave connection, and right now is a heightened vulnerability that can increase health problems for folks. And we don't know what the long-term impact will be, but some of the creative ways we've been thinking about it and that we've been seeing and hearing people is that virtual connection is increased, and people had a boost in energy of using Zoom and having happy hours or get-togethers or study groups, that we can still powerfully connect with people in this medium. We developed a whole resource for our trainers and for our adults at schools about humanizing this Zoom room. How do you humanize this space that can be really disembodying? You only see people. Do people even have bodies anymore?
Yes. We literally just talking heads? Are we
Yeah,
really
yeah.
just talking
That
heads?
we need to embody this disembodied. That we have the opportunity for people to bring artifacts from their life into virtual spaces. That we can still use our cameras and our faces to connect and to smile. And there's been research to show, even though a lot of people get down on social media and digital uses of communication, that we can get the same neurological boosts in our brain from actual connection virtually, whether that's posting on someone else's social media post or through messaging or texting. Interacting with each other really has a positive neurological effect, and can, through MRIs, still have the same kind of benefit to our brains and bodies. Whereas opposed, if you're just scrolling through social media posts,
Sure.
there is some negative effect that can happen in terms of social comparison and envy. But if we're still genuinely connecting via text and message and video and seeing each other's faces, that can be really powerful. As well as, practicing all of these strengths, getting outside where possible, to exercise, to be out in nature. We've been hearing lots of stories of people having a renewed sense of the lived world, of the earth, of nature, and being in it. That not all loneliness leads to depression, right? That it can be transformed into a sense of solitude or of deep connection that transcends those boundaries of separation. And so we really are encouraging people to double down on creative ways to connect. People doing kind of positive ding-dong ditches, showing up to a friend's house and dropping off supplies.
Yeah.
We've seen the smallest acts of generosity and connection really spark joy and hope and thriving in people's lives. And so, we're passionate about how do we do that creatively and how we do that across the whole system, because as you say, with the separation that has come with physical distancing, we've lost a lot of the natural social infrastructure that typically takes place. As a parent, I drop my kid off at school. I connect in traditional times. I connect with the other parents. We become friends. My son's starting kindergarten this week. So you start to make friends with other parents, the
Yes.
kids relate to each other. We start to build community through this informal and formal social infrastructure. Now, a lot of the normal ways that we bump into human beings in the hallway or at the grocery store have been temporarily, hopefully, limited, and there's barriers to it. But we've also seen really creative ways that people are rebuilding that social infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so to keep imagining that for each community, how are we still connecting beyond the separation and thinking about each other and taking care and compassion for each other?
Well, I want to just, because I saw in the last 2 weeks this document that you all have created as sources at home that I think are so intensely practical, that kind of build on all of the things that you just said, takes a lot of those principles and puts it into practical application.
Yeah.
And I know you've got some for elementary school age and some for, older teens or families. So, just kind of walk us through this. The link is there in the chat where people can find sources of strength, the web page, and then download this. And this is a free resource, right?
Yeah.
This is a downloadable. So you guys, I cannot tell you strongly enough how valuable this is on Sources of Strength page. As you see it there, it's the at home under general sources of strength activities. It's that at home. So Dan, just walk us through some of, some of the parts that you really like about that you think people can put into practice.
Yeah. So just to give you a history of why we created this document, not only to meet the moment, but we had a school district here in Colorado, Jefferson County School District, large school district, that, was doing food pickups for students during a tough time when there's food insecurity and people have lost their jobs. We're in the middle of an economic crisis. And they said they were already running sources in their schools, and they asked, can't we produce a document for families at home? Just that people are feeling overwhelmed. They may not have the skills or the tools just to talk to their kids about strength and resilience in this moment. And so we developed this resource. It should be useful for anyone, even if they've never been through a Sources of Strength training before, to have conversations. So if you scroll down, it's got a whole bunch of resources to use at home. A letter from our kind of founder and executive director introducing you to the wheel and each strength. But then it breaks down really simple tools and practices to have conversations about strength at home, around the dinner table, recipes for strength, you might say. You could cook a meal and chat with your child or your student, how to have fun, how to acknowledge hard times, and be vulnerable as an adult, to share but don't overshare. And so each of these little pieces here is a conversation around that particular strength. A check-in prompt that you could have a conversation about, an activity you could do together, a way you could practice gratitude for that strength that you have, and then a whole host of other really simple prompts that are strength-based that can get you into curious and affirming, non-judgmental conversations with your children or with your family about belongingness and gratitude.
Yeah, just pause there for a second and so that people can maybe see some of some of the what you're saying, like see what some of the questions are.
Yeah. So for example, around thankfulness, we know that just saying 3 things that you're thankful for as little as 21 days can actually have a really powerful neurological effect of training our brain to look for the good stuff, not just the tough stuff. And so questions like, what are 3 things you're grateful for today? It's really tough for gratitude and anxiety to exist in the same brain space. And that often when we practice gratitude, it helps to reshape about thinking about that current moment. We heard this lovely story of that practice from a mother of a middle schooler in Maryland, who their school was obviously running a thankfulness challenge. And her son came home with one of our little cards that says, what are you 3 things you're thankful for? He was at the table writing in every single one: video games, video games, video games. She emailed us to say, I have no doubt that my son is grateful for video games every single day of his life, but I think maybe he missed the point since he was filling out every single day all at once, like he had forgotten about it. And a couple weeks go by, she had kind of written that off, and Dad comes home from work and sits down at the dinner table and just starts dumping his emotions on everybody. He's taking it out on everybody at the table. And this little middle school kid turns to his dad and says, "Hey, Dad, at school, I'm learning that practicing gratitude can change the way you think about your day." And the dad says, "Whatever, forget about it." And the kid says, "No, really, let's do it, Dad. Say three things you're thankful for." So the dad pauses and thinks and shares three things he's thankful for. And a little bit of the mood lifts. And he says, "Well, let's all go around." And the whole table shares three things they're thankful for. And the entire dynamic of that dinner table changed, all because of this student being willing and brave and courageous to use this tool to reshape how the dinner, engagement and conversation was going. Or questions like, when is the time you felt that you really belonged? How often do we get to have deep conversations with our children, with our parents, with our community about what fosters belonging for you? What makes you unique, and how have you felt either included or excluded in various communities, so that we could foster that in our community? Or, a what helps me prompt is more, who are the people in your life that help you, or how do they help you, or what kind of big emotions do you experience, but what helps calm you, your calming or connecting or energizing activities. So yeah, a whole host of prompts for each of the strengths, and then some other themes that I think sometimes you just need a good question as a parent or as a partner to start a really deep, powerful connection where as John O'Donohue, the Celtic theologian and poet, would say, deep conversations where you find yourself saying things that you never knew you knew. But that these conversations that build powerful connection and belonging and meeting can take place, especially during separation of COVID.
Yeah. So what else? Keep going, because this thing is just chock full of stuff.
Yeah. So then it's got, different strength-based activities, ideas for, what could you do to foster family support? We know there's a lot of research out just saying sitting down at the dinner table together as a family to eat really fosters connection and trust. Cooking a meal together, doing the things that are just simple parts of life, but we don't always think about them, especially when we're in crisis moments. They're more important now. Writing a note to someone in your social support network, a friend, or helping a friend study for class or use virtual media. We know it's really challenging and overwhelming to learn a new tech system. So helping a family do that, or asking a friend how they're doing and really listening at this moment. You mentioned, as we were preparing, not asking people, how are you doing, is a pretty overwhelming question, but how are you coping with what's going on? What's been bringing you joy in your life? So different ideas that are typical things we do with our family, but sometimes when we get busy or overwhelmed or laid off and stressed, or where our community is experiencing violence, we forget to do the things that lead to life, and they're all the more important right now. So there's some prompts there. If you keep going, we also, so for each of the strengths, some ideas. There's also a strength index in this overall page on our website with different ideas, morning, afternoon, and evening. There's some one-pagers in here to start a conversation about emotions. You could print out this tangled ball of emotions and talk about what are the feelings you've been wrestling with that are big right now, and talk about that with your family. And how are you coping also? What do you need to help? What strengths are you using to help manage and bring those emotions back down to size? There's also a strength check-in that has some prompts that you could fill in a particular strength that has helped you in one of these areas, or write in your own. So family support, take a sibling out for ice cream, something really simple, write that in. We also have like a what we call a Quingo, quarantine bingo somewhere in here. There's where you're gamifying practicing health. There's some self-care kind of cards and check-ins. And then this is a piece from our elementary curriculum that has just been released. We wrote a new curriculum for grades 3 through 5, releasing it in the middle of a pandemic. We train coaches, and then this curriculum gets used in classes. And this is one of those pieces, we call it the regulation railroad. So we tried to create a story around where we feel our emotions in our body, learning to identify, like, oh, I feel when I'm anxious in my stomach because of the vagus nerve that runs through my digestive tract. right, in my large and small intestines, I feel agitated, but that messes with my digestive system. And that's actually anxiety. That's where I feel it. What emotion is it? Naming it. So we also have like a feelings wheel that people can use to learn to name the particular emotion they're feeling. That emotions are complex, but also become intelligent about identifying them. And then how big is this emotion? Is it really big? Is it just is it a smaller emotion? Kind of, so where do I feel it? What is it I feel? How big is it? And then bring that into the station at the Regulation Railroad and talk about, what do I do to
Mr.
regulate?
Adams, can I ask a question, Mr. Adams?
Yeah, yeah.
Feel like I'm in school. So when I saw on this, the tree with the how big is the emotion,
Yeah.
it just put together stuff that I knew in my head, but hadn't put it into that kind of a visual, because helping, I think I referred to it earlier, helping learning, giving the emojis or feelings words that I had already heard and learned practice. But what I liked about this is, maybe somebody says, I feel, I mean, this is even, I could see this in my marriage and my friendships, my relationships with my friends, my kids, is somebody says, I'm feeling really angry right now, or that really kind of ticked me off, to be able to say, to identify, like, is this like a big emotion, meaning, man, we've really gotta, I gotta pay attention to this because you are feeling like this, or is it kind of more in the middle, or is it somebody just kind of like, that was kind of annoying. And
Mm-hmm.
so annoying is different than, I'm ready to explode,
Mm-hmm.
or I don't even want to be in this relationship. And to be able to help kids not only name it, put a name to it, but to even describe the strength of it, to identify, is this a little thing that I really can sort of, or is this something I really need to talk to my
Yeah.
mom about, or talk to my dad or my friend? That was
Yeah.
helpful.
Yeah, and deciding what's going to be helpful to regulate that emotion may
Yeah,
vary depending on the size
yeah.
of it. But we try to say emotions aren't good or bad, right? They're something that tell us that something's going on inside. They're a communication system that our body uses to say, I have a need to be filled, to regulate this emotion. Or sometimes anger is a result of being upset about oppression and doing something about it. So there are really powerful emotions that lead to action, and sometimes there are powerful emotions that feel overwhelming, that we feel like we're going to transgress the boundaries of our own container, that we're going to explode. And so the movie Inside Out is a great way also of describing, sometimes anger's at the control panel and you got to pull it away.
Yeah.
Sometimes sadness needs to be dragged across the floor by joy. um, and then we can find ways to regulate those emotions if we learn to identify where it is, what emotion it is, and how big they feel. Then we can employ lots of different strategies, whether it's calming activities to calm us down.
And you've got a list of those, right? I mean,
Yeah,
I've
I
heard
think
some
I
of those.
think there are in this document, not only the process of how you could do that, but then having young people write, what are your calming activities, whether that's a breathing exercise or relax and release, or what are your grounding activities, where you're using your senses, your sight, your hands, your sense of sound or smell or taste to really help ground yourself and deal with those emotions, challenge them. And then energizing activities, whether it's games or connecting. So we've also, it's open source, currently created a whole host of virtual games that can be played, because we think that a pandemic shouldn't stop us from having fun. And we play games not because we don't take suicide prevention seriously or this moment. We play them because we take it really seriously. And we believe good medicine of laughter and play and connection. So this Quingo that I mentioned is a way of gamifying strength and protective factors. So maybe you use this tool to play a game of bingo with your family, or you create your own Quingo board and challenge your peers or your friends. We also created a board game that you could play, a game of strength to talk about protective factors in your family's life. So our team, one of the results of a pandemic was to get really creative about how do we do this at a distance, but in a really playful way that takes seriously the moment, but also gives us hope. So yeah, a whole bunch of resources for that board game. And I think that is probably everything that's in there. We have translated some of this into Spanish as well. That's on the website. Unfortunately, not the entire tool, but a good deal of it, so it can be accessed in Spanish as well.
Dan, this has just been, I've been looking forward to this conversation, and because I completely believe in this approach. It brings me joy just even talking about it, and feeling, like I said, that it's not Pollyanna, it's not slapping a Band-Aid, it's giving people practical, usable tools. And I'm so excited for our audience to try some of this. I can't wait to hear back from some of them. I hope some school districts, folks, educators who might be watching this would consider bringing sources of strength, to their school district, youth groups, kind of every which way you can think of to put this upstream effort into place. So just as we close, you said it a little bit, I think you mentioned it, but just, maybe as you close us out, in this very difficult, it is a difficult time. It is. There's just no way that we can say this is not a difficult time to be alive and trying to figure out how to do our daily lives. But what gives you hope? What are you hoping both that sources of strength can do? What do you hope that even if people don't take this program, what do you hope they'll glean even from our conversation today? And maybe just you personally, where are you finding hope today?
Yeah, it's a great question. Big, it's tough. I'm finding hope in these really powerful moments of connection that are still possible. That magical moments, or moments of alchemy where people are together, even in a virtual room, can still do like transformational circle work with each other. That sharing our stories can still happen. And so we've been hearing really powerful stories, both with our program and just from educators and students, of how they're rising to meet the moment for themselves and for others in the midst of this. That the conversation about coping and emotional regulation is now on the surface, and students are saying it's about time. Young people are saying it's about time that we have a conversation about, what we need to really thrive and survive as human beings. I'm inspired by those stories and the way that young people are taking action, not only around mental health, but about racism and white supremacy in our country, to say no longer are we going to just put up with the systems that don't lead to thriving for all people. I'm inspired by the way that people have become incredibly generous in these small moments of human connection, and the ways that people are still finding to create belonging across virtual space and time. And I'll be excited to see as schools are reopening, new and creative ways that peer leaders, young people, and staff are finding to practice their mental health, to start to celebrate that in public. We're all in a state of recovery. We might be in the same storm, but we're in lots of really different boats of how this has impacted people.
Yes.
But we're all in a state of recovery at some level, and let's do that recovery out loud. Let's recover out loud together as a conversation with others, and do that in our schools. And if we do that well, I think, that even though there have been great losses, that we will continue to grieve and look back on what could we have done better as a nation and as communities to save lives. There will also be really powerful positive things that come out of this, and I don't want to only highlight those, but I think that we can't just say, we're in a moment of crisis without also saying a lot of people are pivoting to meet the moment in their own lives, in their schools, in their communities. And so if we do this together, and if we highlight the ways that we're coping right now, I think that's really hopeful for me, that we'll come out a stronger community and a stronger individuals, as a result of not only focusing on the trauma and the stress of this, but the post-traumatic growth that will come out of a moment of crisis.
Thank you. Thank
those
you.
stories are giving me hope.
Even me as an Eeyore, I'm encouraged by, I believe that. I believe that you're right. So thank you for all that you've shared. Thank you for, like I said, I can't wait to see how people respond and how they put this into practice. But God bless you, Dan, you and your
Yeah.
family, and always good to be with you. Thank you for sharing today.
Thank you, Kay. In saying goodbye to you, you always remind me of this Sufi poet in Cape Town, Shabir Bonabai, who says, wear your faith as a fragrance and not as an armor. And I feel like you embody that, having gone through a great tragedy of losing a child to suicide, that you haven't built walls of armor around yourself to protect you from adversity, but you've allowed the way that that suffering has transformed your life to be a fragrance that is healing to others around you. And so thanks for having me to participate in this conversation with you. And I look forward to can further work with you.
Okay, so you made me cry, but that's very kind.
Mm.
Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Kay. Take care.